Welcome back to another episode of I Wish They Knew, a show where we share big ideas that deserve more attention in about the time it takes to enjoy a cup of coffee. I'm Joe Hirsch. Today's wish comes from Mark C. Crowley. Mark is a pioneer in workplace leadership, a speaker, and the best-selling author of Lead from the Heart. It's really a classic if you haven't checked that out. He also hosts the Lead from the Heart podcast. I recommend you see that as well. And his new book is The Power of Employee Well-Being, Move Beyond Engagement to Build Flourishing Teams. Flourishing teams, wouldn't we like more of those? Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, Joe. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Likewise. So what do you wish more people knew?
I wish that people knew that businesses' longstanding focus on employee engagement and improving it in our workplaces has rarely ever been sincere. And the clear evidence of that, Joe, is that employee engagement in America and around the world is essentially no better than where it was over a decade ago. I also wish that people knew that focusing on employee well-being is a simpler yet far more powerful way of motivating human beings to perform their best at work. And focusing on employee well-being is actually a win-win when you consider that it's always been employers who benefited from a focus on employee engagement, never employees. Whereas employee well-being is a win-win. Organizations win when people feel their well-being is strong and solid. And of course, so do the employees themselves.
So I want to get into that because I think you're right when you say that for a long time, organizations have been focusing on how people feel about their work, but we really haven't spent enough time thinking about how they feel at work. What did you find to be the most important drivers of well-being?
Well, let me say this. I'm a little bit more cynical than you just suggested in that I don't really think that most companies, now there are exceptions clearly, ever really took engagement seriously. I don't think Wall Street ever took it seriously. So CEOs never took it seriously. So they did a twice a year. It used to be once a year survey. By the time the survey results got out to managers, it was 1 or 2 months later. You're looking at arrears. No one was ever held accountable for any of this. And companies pretty much figured out that they could meet their goals without being concerned about employee engagement. It even built in an acceptance of high turnover. It's like, well, we'll just recruit more and we'll just train more and we're not going to worry about it. And so the reason it hasn't improved is because we've never taken it seriously. And I think the other aspect of this is that employees, ironically, engagement for them is getting worse because they're looking at this and they're like, this is so insincere. You're never going to do anything with the feedback that I'm giving you. No one's ever going to be held accountable. I just told you that I work for a toxic boss, but I come in 6 months later, I'm still working for the same toxic boss because no one ever held them accountable or even gave them the feedback to tell them you need to improve. So well-being is much simpler, obviously, because you're just simply asking people how they feel, and then you can calibrate your behavior to that. So you can ask an employee, how do you feel about your manager? And within 24 hours, every manager in the company is being asked, their employees are being asked the same question. And you're being able to see Joe is hitting his numbers consistently and people love him. And Mark consistently is getting numbers just like Joe, but people hate working for him. And you can ask questions about any of the stuff. So it can be, how do you feel about the benefits? How do you feel about your growth opportunities? Managers can get together and talk about this. All of the feedback can be transparent. You can share it with employees so that they can see that there's real depth to this. So it just moves the needle in a very big way. And I think that's the most important answer to your question.
So by well-being, are you referring specifically to the attitudes and the beliefs that people have about their workplace, their bosses, or are you looking at it a little more holistically in terms of their mental well-being, their physical health? When we really drill down to well-being at work, where do you think organizations ought to put the focus?
So the first thing we need to accept is that people are not rational the way we always thought we were. So rather than ask somebody, what do you think? We should ask people, how do you feel? Or what do you feel about this? The question should simply be, how do you feel about your opportunities to progress in this company? How do you feel about the coaching that you get from your manager? And this can be in a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or bright green emoji, bright red emoji, and everything in between. Very simple. The research that I used in the book comes out of Great Britain, where an economics professor at Oxford simply asked people, how did you feel? And didn't coach them on anything. And then they watched this on a week to week, month to month basis, and they were able to show that simply asking people on their own volition how they felt, that they were capable of saying, well, I'm not going to let my personal life interfere with this unless my work life is interfering with my personal life. And then it will be. If I'm getting emails from my boss at 10 o'clock at night, then I need to make that point. Right. But so what this gives companies the ability to do is just to ask a simple question. You can ask 1, 2, 3 questions. Asking 10 questions is missing the whole plot. You want to find out something specific. You want to see how people are feeling about something and then respond to that. Sometimes you're going through a tough patch and you ask people how they feel and they're like, this sucks. Like, I'm not happy. And managers are going to go, we have to make the intelligent decision that this is probably not a good time for any of us. We're just going through a slog and we're going to have to figure out ways to make things better, but we're probably not going to get good grades until the circumstances change. There's some intelligence there, but generally it's just data. And if you're asking the same questions on a consistent basis and you're tracking those results, you're able to see maybe we need to spend a little bit more time over here. It's just simple questions. How do you feel about X? That I think companies, if they get into the practice of pulsing or using pulse surveys and having a rigorous response to it. And by rigorous response, what I mean is we've already established that in engagement, we never held anybody accountable for it. If you're going to be pulse surveying your employees, that you can ask people to tell you how they feel about a specific manager. It's all anonymous, but the manager gets the feedback that his team or her team says this about you. And now you have some accountability because going back to my example, if there's Joe Hirsch's of the world who are getting great performance out of people and people feel that they're working for someone who really cares about them, and then they work for me and I'm driving them to get the same performance that you are, but I'm breaking their spirits and managing with fear and intimidation and not coaching them, not caring about them, not supporting them individually, not really caring about their employee well-being. Well, the company should be coaching me. They should be saying, hey, we need to work with you because you're doing more harm than you're doing good here. And we've never done that with engagement. I think that's the most powerful outcome from this is that we can actually change managerial behavior or actually change out managers who never get on board with it.
Yeah, so let's talk about the impact of managers on all this, because it is clearly a result of a manager, how someone might feel about their work and about themselves, right? There's nothing more depleting than a bad boss. There's nothing more empowering than a great boss. So what could leaders be doing differently to ensure the well-being of everyone on their teams?
Just demonstrate that you know the person, you know what's going on in their life outside of work. It's a surprisingly huge driver is that people feel like if I work for you, that Joe knows what my life is and what matters to me and what I'm trying to accomplish, not just in my career, but outside of my life, just demonstrating that I matter to you. This is a big one, to sort of emphasize and punctuate what you just said. Gallup has shown that relative to engagement, up to 70% of the scores are really driven by the manager. And we can impute that the same is true for well-being. The manager, there's no culture, organizational culture that's going to trump an individual manager's culture, right? Whatever we have on our team. But the other one that I think is one that I want to call out that I think is just sort of unknown and remarkable is this idea of belonging. So the professor at Oxford, he told me that we have this idea that people leave managers when they quit their jobs. And he goes, that's not necessarily the number one reason. The number one reason that we found is that people don't feel that they belong within the team, that their ideas aren't valued, that they don't feel that they have a friend and a deep connection with people, that they don't feel like the people they work with have their back. And interestingly, there's all kinds of research that have shown that the highest performing teams, like professional sports, collegiate sports, if you look at the top performing coaches, you'll see that they're not looking for individual stars. They're looking for people who have great talent, who work well with other people. And that's really what we should be emphasizing at work.
Right. How to put those ensembles together so that every individual feels recognized for his or her strengths and that those strengths can be applied in service of something larger than just them.
And that they're not competing against each other. So, you and I are working on the same team, and our boss comes to us and they go, "Hey, Joe, going to give you a raise, man, because you're beating Mark really big time." So, okay, now I'm looking at you as a threat. Like all of a sudden, I'm being compared to you. Whereas what I'm hoping is that the two of us will work well together. I support you, you support me. So we actually have to have rewards that don't pit people against each other and actually reward the team for the performance. It's not to say that if you're a star and I'm not necessarily a star, but I'm a good contributor, that you shouldn't get better rewards and pay and those kinds of things. That's fair and reasonable. But where it's not fair and reasonable is that if we make our recognition programs and our compensation programs or anything that's high visibility, where it appears like reviews, for example, where I feel like I'm competing with you. Because when you are recognizing performance, the first thing you're doing is you're saying, how did this team perform before we look at individuals? Because I can go, I'm managing 10 people, but I got a Joe Hirsch on my team. I go, "Hey, boss, look at Joe. I mean, he's just doing great, isn't he? I mean, I hired Joe and, I work with Joe all the time and I'm coaching him and I'm making it look like I'm doing a great job managing." When if you look around and the whole team, the whole ensemble, use your language, isn't performing well, it's gaslighting for me to be saying Joe's killing it when the rest of the team isn't.
I'm wondering alongside that, how we actually start measuring for well-being, because measuring something like how a person is feeling can be a tricky target to capture. Are there particular metrics that you have found to be useful in capturing this information? Or is it really just a matter of looking at adjacent data that could paint a clearer picture of what's
It's
actually
it's
going on?
it's really that. It's really that. Imagine, if I think back on my career, there were times where I was being asked to do some really brutal things. Like we were brutal in the sense that we were changing the whole culture of an organization. So, I'll use this analogy. Let's say that you're in the pizza business and everybody who works for you can spin the dough and throw it down and throw the sauce and has the right mozzarella in their hands every time. And they're masters at making pizzas, right?
It's an art.
And management comes in and says, guess what? The trends are chicken. We're getting into the chicken business. So what's the first thing that happens? People are like, but I'm a master of pizza. I don't know anything about chicken. So they're feeling very insecure. Am I going to even be able to make it in the chicken business? And so that's what we were going through. We were going from pizza to chicken. People were kind of freaked out. And so a large amount of my time was spent on making sure people knew you were going to be trained and taught. You're going to be able to get you'll be successful at chicken. It may take some time, but you'll get there, making people feel emotionally and psychologically safe. But there were times where if you just asked, generally, how do you feel? That people wouldn't be giving you very good grades, right? So there has to be some intelligence put into this. But if you're asking consistent questions and you're asking them routinely and, with a repetition, start to see the trends on a very narrow focus. So how are people feeling about their bosses? How are people feeling about their benefits? How do you feel about belonging? Do you belong on your team? Right? How do you feel about the coaching that you're getting? How do you feel about the growth opportunities that you have? So,
Right. Right.
so the specificity of this is where the value is.
Yeah, the details really make that difference. So, just on that topic of friendship, and it's something that comes up in the book as well. Having a workplace buddy is one of the most important indicators of how someone feels about their work. So, do you think there's a role for leadership here to try to forge those connections, or does it really just come down to an individual's own personality and preferences?
I've heard from some people that, I don't need a friend at work. I got plenty of friends outside of work. And what I want to say is, yeah, but you're spending 10 hours a day with these people and you can't make it up with anybody else, including your spouse or partner or your best friend. Like there's no 10 hours that you're going to make up somewhere, right? So I think that what I'm very strongly advocating for are two things. One is give people social opportunities because we're working remotely, and in some cases, people come in on a Tuesday, and other people are coming in on a Wednesday, and never the twain shall meet. And so you're not really having that connection. And so I'm saying create social events during work hours. Don't ask moms to, go out for drinks after work because they're going to go pick up their kid at school or their babies at daycare. And right, we wouldn't want to exclude anyone. Just give people social opportunities. But the other, I think, is even stronger, which is to create a culture where we share, we collaborate, we look out for each other. And if you're having a success, I'm going to ask you to share with everyone what you're doing. And it literally lifts all boats. You get to a point where you just feel like you're working with people who are helping you and will do things for you. This is one of the greatest drivers of employee well-being. And it's also one of the greatest drivers of team performance.
The book is The Power of Employee Well-Being, and the author, and I think he's made a pretty powerful case for why it matters, is Mark C. Crowley. Mark, thanks for sharing your wish with us today.
Thank you, Joe. This was great.